right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Let's see, make sure I got all my stuff set the right way. Let's do this. Welcome again, and so grateful to have you here with us today. This is Friday Reflections, and my name is Peter Bolland, and this is the San Diego Oasis webinar space, Zoom space that y'all and I have gotten so familiar with, haven't we, over this past year and a half? And we've learned to love it. And at first it was a big learning curve and kind of a challenge to kind of get it all worked out, but look how smooth it's all going. So we had to let go of one thing and kind of embrace another thing. And in the end, it started to fit us well, like an old pair of shoes. And it's a remarkable thing. And you know, many of us here have been alive for a little while, and we've gone through that cycle dozens and dozens of times of having to let go of something, and then the awkward newness of a new thing, and then eventually that new thing becoming the comfortable old thing. And then it changes again and off we go. So listen, I just want to invite you into another 30-minute time of reflection here called Friday Reflections. This is a half hour for us to look back at the world's wisdom traditions, see if there's an insight in some text or passage or poem or scripture from one of the world's religions or philosophical systems that we can use right here and now to kind of answer a question for us or help us over the hurdle of some suffering that we're enduring, or just shed a little light into the abyss of confusion and very often chaos that always dogs our every step. So that's kind of what we do here. And I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for pulling away from whatever else you would be doing and instead coming into this and parting with your time and your treasure, putting your $5 in the hat when it goes around, and helping us keep the lights on here and keep the programs flowing. It's such an honor to be in this relationship with you as we create this together. We really do. I know I'm the guy with the mic and the camera on here, but this is a sangha, as Buddha would call it, a community. And that means the world to me that you all have built this with me and with everybody at Oasis. And it's an honor really to be a part of that. So thank you. You know, it's coming on autumn, isn't it? And autumn is a time of letting go. It's a time of emptying out. And I don't know when exactly autumn officially begins, but it sure feels like it. It's getting cool. Daylight savings time ends next weekend. It's Halloween this weekend. October is done. I call that autumn. So here we are, even in San Diego, where if you're not from here, you think, oh, you guys don't have seasons. But those of us who've lived here a long time, we sure do have seasons. Autumn is Santa Ana's and dry, cool mornings, and the liquid amber trees in the neighborhood turn red, and there's plenty of color and interesting things happening. And the time change reminds me of the fact that we have to let go of so many things. That some people like daylight savings time. They don't like the time change. I just roll with it. Both systems have their advantages and disadvantages. I love daylight savings time in the summer because it means the day is really long and the sun doesn't go down until 7:30 at night or whatever. But what I don't care for, because we walk every morning at 6, is it's freaking dark, and we have to bring our flashlights, so we can pick up after our dog. And so we're basically walking in the dark every morning, and it'll be nice after next weekend. We'll have a little light in the morning again for our early morning walk. So, yin and yang. And that lesson, though, of letting go of things is such a powerful one that comes around to us every autumn as the leaves fall off of some of the trees, and as the plants begin to turn tawny and brown, and all of their energy begins to move underground to be stored through even the San Diego winter. And it reminds me of what Lori and I are about to do. We're embarking on a pretty major remodeling job right now. In fact, there's a huge box over here in the foyer of the house that contains our new bathroom vanity, 2-sink, big 72-inch long vanity. You know, the cabinets your sinks are in. And we're doing a big master bathroom, master bedroom remodeling. And it's going to take 10 weeks maybe. So we're getting ready to move into another room on the other side of the house and have armies of dudes coming in and out of the house with jackhammers and all kinds of stuff like that. Some of you have lived through this. I'm dreading it. I don't like change, and I don't like being disrupted, and I don't like chaos and dust, and I'm pretty nervous about it. It's rather upsetting, right? What a funny thing. What a funny way to respond to something that is fundamentally wonderful, right? Getting rid of a 1968 bathroom and updating everything in a wonderful way to 2021 standards. This is great. And, you know, we get to do it because my mom and dad, when they passed away 6 years ago, they left their house to me and my two brothers. So we got a little money, and that money is going right into our house, right? So it's just all good, except for I have to move to the other room in the big house. You know, talk about first world problems. It's absurd. But I notice myself feeling apprehensive and anxious about it. And then I say, you know what? This is what letting go feels like. Letting go of the old to make way for something better. So why do I dread it? I don't know, but that's an interesting moment of self-examination, isn't it? I know I'm speaking for a lot of us here that, you know, you make these kinds of decisions to bring in something new, and yet you're kind of like resistant and anxious even about it. And I touch back on the traditions that we often speak about here. I'm thinking mostly right now about Zen Buddhism and its emphasis on emptiness and simplicity. You know, Zen Buddhism began really at the time of the Buddha. At least that's how Zen Buddhists claim, and they tell the story often of the flower sermon. We've shared that story here. Do you remember that one? Where one day the Buddha, you know, 500 BC, ancient India, one day the Buddha gathered his company together to give one of his Dharma talks, his talks. And normally he would have said a bunch of things about Buddhist practice and philosophy, but on this day, he simply held up a flower and said nothing and looked around. And only one man, Kashyapa, signaled with his eyes that he understood what was being said. Kashyapa was later chosen as the second patriarch after the Buddha died. And many years later, when Zen Buddhism came to be in China and Japan, they tell that story as the origin story of Zen Buddhism. They claim that that's when it began, the wordless transmission, the flower sermon. That instead of filling the air with a bunch of words, Buddha simply held up a flower and invited, with his body language, the people who were with him to enter into the silence. I thought of doing that today for Friday Reflections, just holding up a flower for 30 minutes, but I didn't know if that would generate a lot of email, questions. So I decided not to. I decided to talk the whole time like I always do. But I just love that story, and it's so emblematic of the vision of Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is a later Chinese and Japanese form of Buddhism that kind of strips out everything but meditation and emptiness, shunyata. As a response to what had developed alongside it, namely a lot of devotional Mahayana Buddhism with big golden Buddhas and ornate temples and monasteries and Buddhist sutras with elaborate decorations in gold leaf and, religiosity. It happens in every faith tradition. Things get a little fancy, they get a little institutional, they get a little busy. And the Zen Buddhists kind of like struck a match and just set all of that on fire. And the only thing that was left was the simplicity of sitting and coming into direct experience of your Buddha nature, your Dharmakaya. There's a great story about the first Indian Buddhist who brought Buddhism to China, brought Zen Buddhism to China, because Buddhism was already in China when Bodhidharma got there. And this is about 500 AD. So 1,000 years after the Buddha, this Indian teacher called Bodhidharma shows up in China. And there's a fascinating story around that event as well. The Emperor Wu in China, who loved Buddhism, was already interested in Buddhism and had, out of his fabulous wealthy bank accounts, bankrolled the construction of huge golden temples and huge golden Buddhas. And as I mentioned before, gold leaf and gold embossed sutras. And, he was eager that this Indian Buddhist guy, Bodhidharma, was coming, because Emperor Wu wanted to kind of brag to him. He met Bodhidharma and said, look at all these things I've done. What merit do I get for all of this? And Bodhidharma looked at Emperor Wu and he said, no merit at all. I'm sure the emperor was disappointed, but it helps us spotlight an interesting question. What do you think about God, or what do you think about ultimate reality? Is let's just use the God word. Is God an intervening God? Is he interventionist? Can you buy grace with good works, by donating a bunch of money or doing things of outward show? Does that get you closer to enlightenment, nirvana, the kingdom of heaven? Clearly, Bodhidharma's position is, nope, it's useless. God is not a transactional store where you give stuff and then get stuff. It doesn't work like that. And it's also true that we can't think our way to heaven. We can't reason our way with logic to wisdom, to enlightenment. There's another great Zen story of a philosophy professor. I love this story because it throws guys in my profession under the bus. These Zen stories, there's always a fool, right? So here's how this one goes. A philosophy professor went to see a Zen master. And he asked the Zen master, can I have an interview with you? I'd like to learn more about Zen Buddhism. And the Zen master said, sure, come on in. And they sat down facing each other on a table. And the Zen master began to make tea. And the professor said, I've traveled the world. I'm a scholar of great renown. I've read all the books, and I've written many books myself, and I know a lot about everything. And I just, I think I have everything pretty much figured out, but I want to learn a little bit more about Zen. And as the professor is speaking, the Zen master is filling up his cup of tea. And he fills it halfway, then he keeps pouring, and then he fills it to the top and he keeps pouring. And the tea overflows the cup and it flows across the table and it pours onto the lap of the professor, and he leaps up and he says, what are you doing? And the Zen master said, the professor's cup is already too full. There again, we see the juxtaposition between the idea that wisdom comes with the accumulation of knowledge and the counterpoint. Wisdom comes when we empty out, when we let go, when we leave space. It doesn't come with the accumulation of information. And so in that Zen story of the philosophy professor and the cup of tea, we again get that pedagogical message, that teaching, that we cannot think our way out of this mystery. We have to feel or experience our way deeper into it and then through it. It isn't outer actions that will give us merit, and it isn't intellectual, rational explanations that will give us merit. That's a fascinating tension, it seems to me, that we find in many wisdom traditions. Let me take you from ancient China and Japan to Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart was a German Roman Catholic priest, right? And mystic, one of the prominent Christian mystics that we still talk about. He lived from 1260 to 1328. I'm reading from one of his books. He says, Meister Eckhart says, "You may fast and pray and do good works. Oh, yes, you should. But if you ever imagine that all those things you do are some transaction, oh no, God is not in business. God only wants a temple that is perfectly and completely empty." Isn't that remarkable? I love that. And it happens all the time that the Christian mystics are in alignment with the Asian philosophers and sages, particularly of Zen Buddhism and of Taoism as well. A little later in the same Meister Eckhart book, there's another passage. Eckhart writes, "When I let go of all that, like letting a heavy sack drop from my drooping shoulders, God has room to be God within me. And I wonder what I thought I needed with all that baggage in the first place." So another, this time from the Roman Catholic or Christian perspective, another affirmation of the virtue of emptying out. Otherwise, there's like that Zen Buddhist story about the philosophy professor. Otherwise, there's no room for, in Meister Eckhart's theology, for God to get in. In Zen Buddhism, we of course wouldn't use the God word. Zen Buddhism is, I wouldn't say atheistic, it's just non-theistic. You know, it's trans-theistic. It doesn't deny or affirm the existence of any deities. It's just over here doing this. In fact, Eckhart's comment about baggage here reminds me of another Zen saying, "How refreshing the whinny of a pack horse unburdened of everything." So I bring that back to bear on my own life, and I invite you to bring it to bear on your own life as you, at this time of our life, at this time of the year, in this epoch of pandemic, what we have been forced to let go of, because it isn't often voluntary, is it? And what we are choosing to let go of. Since we got over on the Christian side of stuff here and the Western religions, let me get my Bible here. I want to go to a story from Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew. It's a really famous scene, right? Where this rich guy comes to Jesus and he says, "Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life?" So again, there's that kind of transactional spirituality. This rich guy says to Jesus, "Okay, what do I have to do to get the good stuff, to get heaven or eternal life or whatever the reward is? How do I buy it? What actions can I commit that will guarantee my acquisition of it?" Yeah, you can see how that's going to go. So Jesus says to him, "Why do you ask me about what is good? There is only one who is good." So there Jesus points away from his own expertise to presumably, Brahman, Tao, the Father, God. Jesus goes on, "If you wish to enter into life," key, interesting word, interesting way of putting it. "If you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments." And then so the guy says, which ones? And Jesus rattles off a bunch of them, don't murder, adultery, the usual, honor your father and mother, love your neighbor as yourself, And the young man said to him, I've kept all those. Yeah, good. So what do I still lack? And Jesus said to him, "Oh, if you wish to be perfect, go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away grieving, for he had many possessions. So I got a couple things to say about this. One, does that mean that we all should give away all of our stuff and go live in a ravine under a freeway underpass in order to be enlightened or to be closer to God? I don't think that's the teaching at all. Jesus, if you're familiar with the Gospels, this is a teacher fond of hyperbole. He says some things that I don't think would be wise to take literally. Like, for example, in the Sermon on the Mount, also in the Gospel of Matthew, earlier in the Gospel, when Jesus makes this wild claim that being angry with someone is the moral equivalent of literally murdering someone. That if you're angry, you're just as guilty as if you murder someone. I think that's an absurd misunderstanding of Jesus's impact. That it would be silly, wouldn't it, to interpret it that way? It would be silly to turn what he just said to this rich young man, into a universal law that we must all follow. Instead, I think go down deeper beneath the surface. Jesus is talking to one particular guy who is really materialistic, really identified with his acquisitions, really identified with his possessions. For him, it was time to let go. So when we put that teaching on a kind of moral plane or on a philosophical plane, now I bring into my own life maybe a new consciousness, and we are all invited to bring into our lives a new consciousness toward our possessions. So, what are you willing to let go of? What activities, what situations, what arrangements, what relationships, what possessions are you feeling yourself turning away from? So I'm not suggesting any of us should feel guilty about being middle-class, comfortable people. This isn't about the inducement of guilt or shame. This is about the consciousness of renunciation, to use the Hindu term, or the consciousness of non-attachment, to use the Buddhist term. And that is a really rich question. I think about, for me, I'll just confess here, I'm feeling something turn away from me. I'm feeling myself turn away from something that I held dear for many, many years, many decades, my whole life. And that is my music career. I'm obviously a musician, but I haven't played a show in about 2 years. And I haven't recorded an album since 2014. And that used to be a huge deal for me, a huge part of my identity, of making a record every couple of years, really ambitiously pursuing that career, sending it out to all the music writers and the talent buyers, and putting myself in the running for a San Diego Music Award. I got a little shelf in my music room with some trophies that I've won through the years, and I keep all the good reviews that I got, not the bad ones. And I was, on top of my day job, really trying to be a singer-songwriter and a band leader, and make music that I thought was good. And playing live shows was always a part of that. But what's happened these last 2 years? It's not being able to play. I noticed that I didn't miss it as much as I thought I would. I mean, look, that's kind of a young person's game. And I'm not being ageist here. I'm just confessing my own evolution. That it wasn't bringing joy to me the way it used to, that it became a job. It became a burden. I don't mean the music part. I still write songs. I still play for myself all the time. But that whole business of like chasing audiences, chasing stages, trying to get onto bigger stages. There's always that next inner circle that you're not in, that you're trying to get in. As soon as you're in that circle, oh crap, there's more inner circles that I'm not in. It's endless. And so feeling that slip away from me is really liberating. I feel like that Zen saying, the whinny of a pack horse, unburdened of everything. As I feel it, as I feel myself putting that down, there's an emptiness now. There's a radiance, there's a space, there's a grace. There's an excitement again about what's next, and about just being a person, just being alive, and letting that chase kind of end. And isn't that what Halloween's about? I mean, that's this weekend, right? Halloween is a playful celebration of letting go. On one hand, you dress up in costumes, so you get to pretend to be anyone other than you. like put down this whole Peter Bolland thing and get to go be somebody else. That for some people is really fun and really liberating. Letting go of your identity and your professional status and your responsibilities, and for a night anyway, trying another mask on. Or to take Halloween even further, isn't it a celebration, or at least an acknowledgement of death itself? The altars we build for Dia de los Muertos, and the way we bring the dead back into our life in that beautiful Mexican tradition, and the whole business of horror movies and getting closer to the macabre and to the inevitability of decay. Isn't that just another kind of communal ritual of the acknowledgement of letting go? That it teaches us that we don't really own any of this or control any of this anyway. As Gandhi said when he was asked by a reporter, "What's your philosophy of life?" He said 3 words. He said, "Renounce and enjoy." So I've been inviting you in this session here to consider and reflect in your own life on, what do you feel yourself turning away from? And it doesn't have to be things. It can be activities. It can be situations. It can be relationships or possessions. Maybe don't rush past that. Maybe your soul is sending you a message that if you don't love it anymore, let it go on to its next owner. Let that period of your life graciously come to an end. And it doesn't have to be a grave. It could be a womb birthing what is next. So I want to share with you a poem, as we always do here as we wrap up today's session. This is from Fred Lamott, from his book, Savor Eternity, One Moment at a Time. He has a poem in this collection called Autumn's Door that I want to share with you. So let's do that. Autumn's Door by Fred Lamott. Look, scarlet mushrooms nippled in rotted dahlias, crinkled leaves in moon silence, harpsichords of dew chiming their destiny of ice, tiny omens of oblivion, weightier than summer. Thus do the angels of frolic scatter their keys before you. Open your nostrils now, your throat, to the sacred odor of spoil. Don't be afraid to root in the putrid rind and peel, spent tea and wizened roses webbed in veils of ghostly mold. Find wisdom. Go to the ruined garden where no waste is, and beauty makes use of the useless. Ponder the calligraphy of worms. Enter whatever is empty. In the sepulcher of an ulcerous gourd, smell your way beyond the shroud. Gaze into a spider's web, that fretwork of desolation, window to your own abyss. Become thistledown, threaded in a breath of November sky, caress of November sky, careless where you root. Follow one commandment, be perfect, ever arriving exactly where you are, precisely at the moment you get there. Autumn's Door by Fred Lamott. Namaste. Thank you again for joining me. See you at the Unitarian Church on Sunday. in Zoom. See you at Full Moon Song on Monday night. See you at next week's Friday Reflection. Appreciate y'all so much. See you on the other side.